Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to Episode 9 of Across the Board, the podcast which focuses on board governance, strategic management of risk at the board level, and those who report to the Board of Directors. Today I have with me Stuart Levine. Stuart is the president and founder of Stuart Levine and Associates. He is one of the country's top thought leaders in board governance, board management, and really the effectiveness of boards of directors. In this episode, we talk about why boards are not optimized. We discuss what is board optimization, the recently released NACD report about board culture, how a board can optimize its culture and collaboration, and why a company culture really starts with the board of directors. Finally, we look at why boards become operationalized and look backwards instead of focusing on strategy looking forward. It's a fascinating interview for anyone who is on a board of directors, deals with a board of directors, or in corporate governance or leadership. Across the Board is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox, back for another episode of Across the Board. Today I'm very pleased to have with me Stuart Levine. Stuart is the chairman of the board and CEO of Stuart Levine and Associates. He has significant board experience and executive leadership experience across multiple disciplines, including financial services, technology, healthcare, specializing in strategy, large-scale change management, leadership development, strategic communication, board governance, and customer focus. He's a former global CEO for Dale Carnegie Training. He's a prolific author, having written multiple bestsellers. He also publishes articles on Forbes, the Credit Union Times. He has been recognized as a governance fellow by the NACD and a top 100 director twice. Stuart really is one of the top thought leaders in creating significant value for shareholders and strong organizational cultures. And Stuart is going to visit with us today about board optimizations. So Stuart, with that incredibly long-winded introduction, thank you for taking the time to visit with me today.
Well, Tom, I appreciate the invitation, and I think we're committed to learning, and conversations like this are actually very interesting to us as well. So thanks for the invitation.
Stuart, you had a article you posted on your corporate website on August 24th entitled "Why Your Board Isn't Optimized." And in reading this article, I was really struck by a report recently issued by the National Association of Corporate Directors featuring entitled "Board Meeting Optimization Driving Excellence." And some of the numbers that were reported in your article from the NACD report, I thought just were, I don't want to say shocking, but very surprising. So only 54% found their boards fairly collaborative, 6% said they were ineffective, and 2% said they were toxic. 62% of the board members surveyed did not believe their boards were highly collaborative. And if that's the starting point, you really drive home the message that senior leadership takes its signals from boards. So what did those numbers tell you?
It tells me that there's an important conversation that we need to have at the board level about, I'll call it board culture, because we've heard for years, Tom, that tone at the top is so important. And in a certain way, it's become rhetoric. But what tone at the top means from our perspective is how do we function together in the boardroom? Do we collaborate? Do we focus on strategy? Do we have the right conversations with the right people in the room? And then do we set the right culture for the organization? Because remember, Tom, what happens is at every meeting you have senior leaders coming in to present, I'll call it the performance data of their particular business unit and so forth. And those senior leaders will take their cues from us as directors and how they see us collaborate, how they see us asking questions and engage them on strategic issues. And that really does form the culture of the total organization. So when we talk about board optimization and you recognize that only 62% of the people responding to the NACD survey said they were highly collaborative, that tells me that there is a huge opportunity out there to increase financial performance, because that is, at the end of the day, our primary responsibility as directors, to get financial performance and I will call it provide intelligent oversight for the organization. So it says to me in no uncertain terms that there's a large opportunity to enhance financial performance. And that's where, in my view, governance and strategy come together at the right inflection point around results.
So one of the things you noted in your paper was that boards can become very operational and tend to look backwards instead of focusing on strategy and the strategic plan. How do you, if a board has fallen into this trap, how do you help them get out of it?
There are a couple of things that come to mind. Number one, I can tell you in our experience as a board, we just finished a board assessment for a very large organization, happened to be in the transportation sector. And in that board assessment, we were able to, I'll call it, create an environment of trust where some days it's more difficult than others for any one of us to look in the mirror. Some days you have a bad hair day and others you have a good hair day. But in the board assessment, it does, I'll call it, have a respectful way of surfacing important conversations that board needs to have. So I think you start the pivot of moving backwards and spending your entire life looking in the rearview mirror and looking forward into strategy when you have an intelligent conversation about board optimization through a board assessment. And in the conversation and in the client that I'm thinking about a week or two ago, we had what I'll call a very important conversation. And I think one of the findings that directors shared with our firm and our representatives was that they were interested in more learning. And I think that's a under discussed topic. And the whole notion of how do you stay current and how do you lean into the future vis-a-vis, do you understand blockchain? Do you understand, I'll call it artificial intelligence? Are you, without regard to your position in life and so forth, but as a director, are you committed to learning? And how do you get that new information? Because that really does equip a director to participate more vigorously and more fully in a strategic discussion. So I think you make the pivot two ways. One, by having an honest assessment of the board and its effectiveness, and we can get a little deeper on some of those issues. And two, by committing individually as a director to learning and then sharing those learnings, I will call it, not in a self-righteous way, but in a righteous way that says, hey, we have a responsibility, and here is the way that we can stimulate a conversation. And that's why if your culture is right and then you start to learn, then you can be more open to diverse point of views and diverse people, Tom.
So my father was a naval officer, and one of the kind of Navy-isms he always taught me was once an officer, always an officer, but that if you're an officer, you're charged with knowing everything the Navy would task you to do. And if you don't know it, you better go learn it. Is that the concept you're talking about with the board, or is it something else?
No, I think what your father is saying, and actually I read some data about a week ago in the Navy, there have been a series of, I'll call it accidents, and what has really, I'll call it, been focused on was the need for leadership on all of those vessels. And so for me, the officers that your father described to you, definitely number one, in no uncertain terms, understood their mission. They understood and still do. We have incredibly dedicated people serving, men and women, as we speak. But they understand their mission and they understand their responsibility to the people they serve every day, whether they're on terra firma or they're out to sea. And I think those are two components that we can learn from your father about always understanding the mission of the organization and always understanding that leadership is about listening, collaborating, and ultimately why I always had great respect for the Navy and your dad included was they never backed away, and they still don't back away from values and integrity. Because anytime you're running around, and I happen to be in the Army, and I always said, once they gave you a clip in your M16 with live ammo, there were consequences that changed. So understanding the responsibility around integrity, that everything does come out, becomes very important. So, learning, leadership, and consequences for actions are big lessons that I would take away from your father's, I'll call it sharing of wisdom with you.
A number of people who listen to this podcast are senior management and people who report to boards. And one of the things they asked me is, what do I tell the board? Do I wait for them to give me guidance? Do I pontificate? And so I was really intrigued by your remarks on board training and individual board members learning. Is the corporation itself or senior management, are they equipped to help inform or train the board, or should the board go to outside experts for that?
This morning, I was on the phone with a client of ours who we work for a particular financial institution. And there's one word, Tom, that becomes very important to this conversation, and that is preparation. I was working with the CEO to make sure that he was in sync with the chair of the board so that they knew exactly what they wanted to achieve vis-a-vis transferring of information and the input that the CEO wanted vis-a-vis developing the strategy going forward. So I think I'll call it transition in board thinking is we're not sitting passively by waiting for the CEO and his or her team to develop a strategic plan. We are, in fact, engaged on a regular basis, and the smartest, most effective, productive boards are engaged in a strategic discussion every time there's a meeting. So my takeaway from that question is preparation, and I think that's incredibly important vis-a-vis the example I gave you this morning of how working with the CEO, we were able to, I'll call it, organize the agenda properly, get the 3 or 4 questions that, in this case, he needed, and the chair of the board happens to be a woman that she needed from what she was hearing from her colleagues on the other side of the table at the board, and ultimately with, again, a very focused and disciplined approach to achieving the mission. But it's that type of commitment to preparation that differentiates, in our view, excellent boards and excellent senior leaders. And I would say one word to the senior leaders, it's not only preparation in coming in. I've been in a lot of boardrooms in my day and worked for different boards and senior executives, and we always coach and advise the senior leaders. If you come in with a 50-page deck, you will never get through the deck. To me, we as directors always read the material, but it's coming in with a 2-page executive summary that says, hey, look, here is what our plan focus, here is what it looks like on the new technology. And in that executive summary, that helps form, call it that 60 or 90-minute conversation. And again, that requires hard thinking of the senior leader coming in to the boardroom before they just take off with 50 slides. I've seen a lot of conversations go sideways and, frankly, not be accretive for shareholders because they just had too many pages. We're not about killing trees. We're not about putting people to sleep. We're about getting intelligent engagement brains around the room.
Stuart, in your article, you talked about that, but you used a different word, and that different word really struck me. And I'll just read the sentence. It says, board meeting preparation should have a discipline around both before, during, and after. And it was that word discipline that struck me as so important that I think is lacking both at the board level and senior management level, is they don't understand the discipline that you just described.
Look, I was lead director of a large NASDAQ company, happened to be in the healthcare sector, and the discipline comes and feels like this. There is only so much oxygen in a boardroom, Tom, and that means if somebody's coming in to read the Declaration of Independence, the leadership, independent chair, lead director, somebody offline has to say, you know what? You're taking too much oxygen, and in fact, you're dragging the board into a tactical discussion. And so the discipline means that we have to be senior level people should be able to have one-on-one conversation saying, look, we're going to get through this report. We're going to take questions, but we're going to move. And that requires, again, preparation of thinking and discipline. And the most successful CEOs that I've been involved with have preliminary conversations when the board book's been distributed with members of their boards, because it gives them a chance to anticipate any questions. Most boards are not coming to play a game of gotcha. They're coming to be productive, to contribute to the well-being of the shareholders, to the culture and the organization. And so again, discipline means, in my mind anyway, and this is a critical factor, you can almost tell when we assess a board or a corporation, if the meeting's supposed to start at 8 o'clock, the most successful, productive meetings start on time and end on time. And I can think in my own experience of the 10 boards I've been privileged to serve on, if they're supposed to start at 8 in the morning, trust me, at 7:30, 7:45, most of us are sitting around that table with our engines started, ready to go, and at 8 o'clock, we take off. And if we say we're going to take a 15-minute lunch break, grab a sandwich, and come back, we do that. And that requires some discipline because we understand our responsibility and we understand the consequences of having, I'll call it, behaviors that are going to be formative to the culture. So as an example, Tom, if you and I are sitting next to each other and we have our personal devices open and I'm emailing back to my office and, when the senior business leader is out there making an impassioned plea for additional capital on a program, you're really undermining and eroding the culture of the organization because you're not functioning in, let's call it, a disciplined and respectful way. That man or woman has prepared, I can assure you, quite a bit. They're looking for our feedback, and we owe them our undivided attention. And if something major happens and you need to look at your device, guess what? You just walk out quietly for 2 minutes and then come back in. But it's that type of discipline and intelligent leadership, from the chair of the board, lead director. And there are times when you have to have those uncomfortable conversations with members of the board or management. Say, hey, look, next time, we don't need a half hour on that subject. I think we can do it in 10 minutes, and here's the way we do it, okay? So that's where I think discipline begets respect and trust.
Really, you ended with something that I think most people understand on an intuitive level, but laying out the numbers, you really drove it home when you said that the latest NADC 2016 report showed that directors spend approximately 245 hours or 30 days per year on board activities. And succinctly, you say, if you serve on 4 boards, do the math. And it really drives home the point that it takes a time commitment to be a board of director, to be a successful board of director, and to move forward with the goals you have articulated that a company has for its boards. Do you still find that you need to counsel people on this specific point?
I 100% think it's a very important conversation. When I'll call it, meet prospective members of boards in my capacity as the NomGov chair. I ask about time commitments and availability because I've never served on a board where it's been a straight line, very tidy, very clean, 4 or 5 meetings a year, and then you just need to go. Those things do not happen anymore. So for me, and if you look at ISS and you look at Glass Lewis today, they're all in this discussion about 4 boards, and then you're overboarded. And I think you will see a trend where institutional investors will start, and advisors will start voting no for directors who, in their view, are overboarded, because everybody who's on a board knows the intensity of work. And if you're in a leadership position, if you chair a committee or you're a chair of a board or something like that, there's an incredible amount of time that goes into it. And, I think back to this home health care board that I was on years ago, and lead director or chair implies you're staying in touch with your colleagues on the board. You're staying in touch with senior management. You're visiting branch operations, not in an operational tactical way, but you have to understand the business. And so I would say that from a trend line analysis, you will see much more conversation and much more focus on overboarding, because smart people today and investors, institutional investors for sure, that I speak to at various conferences are saying, hey, we want accessibility. We want to make sure that the people are in the game. You can no longer just mail it in. And so for me, I think it's an evolving issue that will get much more traction going forward.
Well, Stuart, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but I was wondering if people wanted to find out more about Stuart Levine and Associates, your company, how could they do so?
Well, excuse me. Thank you, Tom. So what people can do is just come to our website. It's Stuart, S-T-U-A-R-T, StuartLevine.com. Stuart Levine, S-Levine at StuartLevine.com gets me directly. And you can just Google us up, and we get information. And actually, if your participants, your listening audience, are interested in getting our content that we write for Forbes or the Credit Union Times on a monthly basis, they can just send me an email at slevine@stuartlevine.com, and I'll make sure that they get on our content distribution. Very interesting. We developed now over 10,000 views on our content per month. So it's kind of interesting, and we engage like we're doing today with a lot of people around the world.
Hello again, this is Tom Fox. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Across the Board. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate our podcast, as it would help in our rankings and also help get the word out about the only podcast focusing on boards of directors, governance, strategic risk management, and those who report to the board of directors. If you have any questions about this podcast, you can email me at tomfox, tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Also, I hope you will join us again for another episode of Across the Board next week. Across the Board is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.